Let me tell you about the day our entire civilization changed forever. Hey, who am I kidding? Changed is such a mild word for what happened. Shattered might be more appropriate, or perhaps atomized. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I am Professor Kall'ax Venn, lead theoretical mathematics researcher at the Grand Institute of Universal Studies on Centauri Prime. Yes, that unnecessarily long and pretentious name should tell you everything you need to know about how seriously we took ourselves. Took being the operative word here, because these days, well, let's just say hubris doesn't sit quite as comfortably as it used to. Picture our institute. No, seriously, try to imagine the most ridiculously over-engineered building you can think of. Now add about 50 more layers of unnecessary architectural flourishes, multiply the size by 3, and make everything shimmer with that obnoxious bioluminescent material we were so proud of. That's where I spent most of my 300-year career, along with the other brightest minds of the Centaurian Science Academy. Our halls were filled with the soft hum of quantum computers and the occasional frustrated curse of a researcher hitting yet another dead end. But mostly they echoed with our own self-importance. After all, we had solved virtually every mathematical and scientific puzzle our species had encountered. Every single one except for the grand paradox. Ah, the grand paradox. Our civilization's greatest mathematical mystery, first discovered by the legendary theorist Nova Bright nearly 900 years ago. The equations seemed simple enough at first glance, a peculiar pattern in the fundamental fabric of space-time that just didn't quite add up. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept changing shape every time you looked away. The numbers worked, but they also didn't. The logic was sound, but it also wasn't. For 9 centuries, the greatest minds of our species had banged their heads against this particular wall. We had entire wings of the Institute dedicated to its study. Careers were built and destroyed trying to crack it. Some of our most brilliant mathematicians had gone completely insane attempting to reconcile its contradictions. We even had a saying, easier to count the stars than solve the paradox. Of course, we were convinced that eventually one of us would crack it. It was just a matter of time, we said. After all, we were the Centaurians, the species that had mastered faster than light travel, colonized 17 solar systems, and created artificial consciousness. Surely some dusty old mathematical riddle couldn't defeat us forever. Oh, how wrong we were. Because when the solution finally came, it didn't come from one of us at all. It came from a human, and not even one of their famous super geniuses or enhanced intellects. Just a regular human scientist with an irregular way of thinking. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. You need to understand just how deeply this paradox was woven into our society before I tell you about Dr. Maya Rodriguez and the day she turned our universe inside out. Yes, well. I shifted my upper appendages in our gesture of acknowledgement. 3 centuries of research tends to produce results. Take that, short-lived species. Though I must admit, your proposal to approach the paradox through, what did you call it? Chaos theory combined with aboriginal Australian dreamtime mathematics, she said, still smiling, plus some good old-fashioned human intuition. Several nearby researchers stopped pretending not to eavesdrop and stared openly. I heard someone snicker. Aboriginal what? Human intuition? Was this some kind of joke? Dr. Rodriguez. I began carefully. The grand paradox has been studied by the finest minds in the galaxy. We have quantum supercomputers the size of moons dedicated to its solution. The mathematical principles involved are, well, let's just say they're slightly more advanced than counting on fingers and toes. She didn't take offense. That's another thing about humans, they're surprisingly difficult to insult. Oh, I know. That's exactly why I think a completely different approach might help. Sometimes the best way to solve a puzzle is to look at it upside down, you know. Our researchers have looked at it from every possible angle for 900 years, I pointed out. Every possible angle. Every conventional angle, she corrected gently. But humans were pretty good at being unconventional. It's kind of our thing. I was about to explain, very patiently, why this was a waste of everyone's time when Administrator Lux Brightwing interrupted. Brightwing had been running the Institute for over 400 years and had a reputation for eccentric decisions. Let her try, they hummed in their musical voice. After all, what's the worst that could happen? Hey, what's the worst that could happen? I still wake up laughing at those words, or screaming. Sometimes both. The thing about humans that we'd never quite understood, despite all our studies and observations, was their knack for finding patterns in chaos. While we Centaurians sought perfect order and logical progression, humans embraced randomness. They saw faces in clouds, found meaning in coincidences, and somehow turned their primitive pattern recognition skills into scientific breakthroughs. We thought we were humoring her, giving the cute little human her chance to play with the grown-ups. Some even placed bets on how long she'd last before giving up. Nobody bet on her succeeding. Nobody bet on her solving it in 3 months. And nobody, absolutely nobody, bet on what that solution would reveal about our reality. For the first few weeks, we all had a good laugh watching Dr. Rodriguez work. While our scientists used advanced quantum interfaces and neural networks, she insisted on using paper, actual physical paper. She covered entire walls with these sheets, scribbling equations and drawing strange circular patterns she called song lines. The aboriginals, she explained while taping up another paper, mapped their entire continent through stories and songs. They encoded complex geographical and astronomical data into what seemed like simple tales. What if the universe does something similar? The universe doesn't tell stories, I said flatly. Doesn't it? She grinned, drawing another circle. What's gravity but a love story between masses? What's quantum entanglement but a tale of particles that can't bear to be apart? Ridiculous. But then she started making connections. Small ones at first, tiny correlations in the paradox's number sequences that nobody had noticed before. Our researchers dismissed them as coincidences, of course, until they couldn't. Look here, she said one day, pointing to a particularly complex diagram. These patterns? They're fractals, but not normal ones. They're like quantum fractals. Each iteration contains the same paradox, but at different scales. That's impossible, senior researcher Bright Star scoffed. We would have noticed. Not if you were looking for order, Maya interrupted. You were searching for perfect mathematical harmony. But what if the paradox isn't a flaw in the equations? What if it's more like a signature? A signature. The idea was absurd. But more researchers started hanging around her paper-covered walls. More discussions broke out in the halls. More arguments erupted in the quantum computing labs. 3 months in, she made her first major breakthrough. The patterns weren't just similar at different scales, they were exactly identical, down to the quantum level. This wasn't just improbable. According to everything we knew about physics, it was impossible. It's like finding Shakespeare's signature written in the digits of pi, she explained to a now crowded lecture hall. Once is coincidence, twice is interesting. But finding it repeated perfectly across every scale of reality? That's intentional, whispered Administrator Brightwing. The room fell silent. The next few weeks were chaos. Maya worked almost non-stop, fueled by something humans call coffee, a beverage that I'm convinced breaks several laws of biochemistry. More papers went up on more walls. More researchers joined her unorthodox methods. Someone even started drawing in the quantum visualization chamber. Then came the day. I remember it perfectly because it started so normally. Maya was at her usual spot, surrounded by paper, muttering to herself. But something was different. Her hands were shaking. Professor Venn, her voice was quiet. I need you to check something for me. She handed me a single sheet of paper. On it was an equation so elegant, so beautiful, it brought tears to my optical sensors. It was the solution to the grand paradox. But it wasn't just a solution, it was an answer. And that answer. This can't be right, I whispered, my appendages trembling. Run it through the quantum computer. Now. The next hour was the longest of my life. Every available researcher crowded into the computing chamber. The massive quantum engines hummed as they processed Maya's equation. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then the results appeared on the holographic display. No, someone whispered. No, no, no. Maya stood there, face pale, looking at what she'd discovered. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't know. I never thought. Administrator Brightwing's voice cut through the growing panic. Send word to the High Council, now, and someone call the human ambassadors. They need to know what their scientist has found. What had she found? Oh, just proof that our entire universe, every galaxy, Every star, every atom was artificial, engineered, designed, but that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was that, according to the math, the system was preparing to reboot. The first hour after the discovery was pure celebration. Of course it was. How could it not be? 900 years of mathematical mystery solved. The Grand Institute erupted into chaos, the good kind, initially. Scientists were hugging in the hallways, quantum computers were running verification algorithms, and someone even broke out a bottle of Centaurian sparkle wine from the restricted archives. A toast, shouted Professor Novastorm, his voice carrying over the excited crowd. To Dr. Maya Rodriguez, the human who did the impossible. The room exploded in cheers. Maya stood there, looking simultaneously proud and uncomfortable, as researcher after researcher came forward to congratulate her. Even I got caught up in the excitement, my earlier condescension forgotten in the euphoria of scientific achievement. I knew giving you a chance was the right decision, Administrator Brightwing hummed, their bioluminescent patterns glowing with joy, though I must admit, I never expected. They stopped mid-sentence, staring at something on their datapad. The celebration continued around us, but I noticed Maya watching Brightwing intently. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" she asked quietly. Brightwing's glow dimmed slightly. "The implications if these calculations are correct." "They are," Maya said. "I ran them 17 different ways before I showed anyone. That's why I was shaking earlier." I moved closer, my own euphoria starting to fade. "What implications? What are you two talking about?" Brightwing turned their datapad so I could see it. As I read, my primary heart stopped, then my secondary heart, and finally my backup heart gave a painful lurch. "But this means I couldn't finish the sentence." "Yes," Maya whispered. "The whole universe is one giant computer program. And like all programs..." A loud alarm suddenly blared through the institute. The quantum computers were flashing warning signals, every single one of them. The celebration screeched to a halt as screens throughout the building began displaying the same message. Critical system architecture detected. Universal constants destabilizing. Time remaining until full system reboot 89 days, 23 hours, 17 minutes. "What's happening?" someone screamed. Maya's voice cut through the growing panic, steady but grim. "Think of it like finding an on-off switch for reality. Except we didn't just find it, we accidentally started the shutdown sequence." "Can't we stop it?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm despite the terror coursing through my system. She shook her head slowly. "The math suggests this is a scheduled event. Like cleaning up a hard drive. We just never noticed because it happens on a scale of billions of years. But now that we've recognized the pattern, we've become aware of our own deletion." Brightwing finished, their glow now completely dark. The celebration was definitely over. In its place, a new emotion began to spread through the crowd, an emotion our species hadn't felt in centuries. Pure, primal fear. And somehow, this was just the beginning. Because if you think finding out your universe is a computer program is scary, wait until you hear what Maya discovered about who or what wrote the code. News spreads fast in an advanced civilization, but existential terror spreads faster. Within days, every corner of Centaurian society knew about the impending reboot. The streets of our capital were filled with protesters, religious zealots, and doomsday preppers, though what exactly one packs for the end of reality remained a point of heated debate. The High Council called an emergency session, broadcast live across 17 solar systems. Maya stood before them, somehow maintaining her composure while explaining that everything we knew about existence was effectively a computer simulation. "But who built it?" High Counselor Radiant Dawn demanded, all four of their arms trembling. "Who are these programmers?" Maya took a deep breath. "Based on the mathematical signatures, they appear to be fourth-dimensional beings. The universe isn't just a program, it's an experiment. A petri dish for studying three-dimensional life." "Like ants in a farm," I added helpfully, immediately regretting my choice of metaphor as several council members turned various shades of distress. "More like a sophisticated AI training program," Maya corrected. "Think about it. Evolution, natural selection, the development of intelligence were all part of a massive algorithm running in a higher dimension. The grand paradox, it was basically a watermark left by the programmers. The panic that followed that revelation was impressive. The Centaurian stock market crashed 17 times in one day. 3 different religious groups declared it was their apocalypse specifically. The quantum physics department started a fist fight with the theology department over whose fault this was. But Maya wasn't finished. "There's more," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The reboot isn't random, it's scheduled. And based on the patterns in the code, this isn't the first time." The room fell silent. Even the protesters outside seemed to pause. "The universe has been rebooted," before Administrator Brightwing asked, their glow patterns showing pure shock. "Many times," Maya confirmed. "Each cycle lasts billions of years. Long enough for life to evolve, develop intelligence, maybe even figure out the truth. Then restart fresh slate, new experiment." But why, I found myself asking. Why create us just to delete us? Maya's expression was sympathetic but firm. Why do scientists run multiple trials of an experiment? To gather data, to test different variables, to see what life does under slightly different conditions. The implications hit everyone at once. Every civilization that had ever existed, every species that had ever evolved, every individual who had ever lived, we were all just data points in someone else's research project. The riots started that evening. By morning, half the capital was glowing with protest fires. The other half had converted to new religions worshiping our fourth-dimensional creators. The rest of our worlds weren't doing much better. That's when Maya did something unexpected. She called a press conference. "Listen to me," she said, facing the cameras broadcasting to every colony and outpost in Centaurian space. "Yes, our universe is a program. Yes, it's going to reboot. But think about what that means. We're not just random cosmic accidents, we're part of something bigger than we ever imagined." "We're lab rats," someone shouted from the crowd. "We're participants in the greatest scientific experiment ever conceived," Maya countered. "Our lives, our achievements, our very existence, it's all being observed, recorded, studied. Everything we do matters." "But we'll all be deleted," another voice cried. "Maybe," Maya admitted. "Or maybe that's what they want us to think. Maybe discovering the truth, figuring out the paradox, maybe that's part of the experiment too. Maybe how we react to this knowledge is exactly what they're studying." I watched as her words began to sink in. The crowd's panic slowly shifted to something else. Curiosity, wonder, and something uniquely human, defiance. "If we are in a simulation," Maya continued, "then we're not just test subjects, we're the most successful versions of life they've created. Advanced enough to discover the truth about our own existence. Smart enough to recognize the signature in their code. And maybe, just maybe, capable enough to do something about it." Like what I asked, genuinely curious despite my existential dread. Maya smiled, that unnervingly confident human smile. "Well, Professor Venn, now that we can see the code, who's to say we can't modify it?" And that's when I realized why humans had succeeded where we had failed for 900 years. We Centaurians had seen the paradox as a puzzle to be solved. Humans, they saw it as a challenge to be overcome. The universe might be a program, but we had just found the user manual. And humans, as I was learning, had a notorious habit of voiding warranties. The next few weeks were interesting. And by interesting, I mean absolutely chaotic. Our civilization split into 3 distinct groups: the deniers who refused to accept the truth, the acceptors who embraced our nature as simulated beings, and the rebels who followed Maya's suggestion about hacking the universe. The Grand Institute became a battleground of ideologies. The theology department, after recovering from their fistfight with quantum physics, declared that the fourth-dimensional beings were actually the gods they'd been worshipping all along. They just had slightly better computers than expected. "But you don't understand," argued High Priest Starseeker during one particularly heated debate. "This proves we were created with purpose." "Yes," snapped senior researcher Nova Bright, "the purpose of a lab experiment." Meanwhile, Maya worked tirelessly with a growing team of both human and Centaurian scientists. They weren't just studying the code anymore, they were trying to understand it well enough to change it. "It's like learning a new programming language," she explained one evening, surrounded by both physical papers and holographic displays. "Except the language is reality itself, and a syntax error might accidentally delete gravity." The media was having a field day. Talk shows debated whether we had free will or were just very convincing subroutines. Religious programs argued over whether trying to modify the universe's code was blasphemy or our divine purpose. One particularly popular morning show host suggested we were all just characters in some higher being's entertainment program, which caused yet another riot. I found Maya in her lab one night, long after most researchers had gone home. She was staring at an equation that supposedly proved our consciousness was just very complex mathematics. "Do you ever regret solving it?" I asked. The paradox. She looked up, those strange human eyes reflecting the glow of the quantum displays. Would you rather live in a comfortable lie or know an uncomfortable truth? That's not an answer. Sure it is, she smiled, that irritating human smile again. Look, your people spent 900 years trying to solve this mystery. You could have stopped, could have decided some things weren't meant to be known. But you didn't, because deep down, every intelligent species wants to understand their reality, even if that understanding hurts. And now that we understand, now we get to decide what to do with that understanding. She gestured at her work. We can panic about being in a simulation, or we can try to understand how it works. We can cry about being someone else's experiment, or we can become an experiment they'll never forget. A sharp beeping interrupted us, another alert about societal unrest. Somewhere in the capital, the deniers and acceptors were having another philosophical brawl. The rebels had probably started taking bets. Your solution destroyed our society's foundations, I pointed out. No, Maya countered, turning back to her equations. It showed you your foundations were already built on something bigger than you imagined. Now you get to decide what to build next. She had a point. Our civilization had prided itself on understanding everything. Now we understood nothing. And somehow, that felt like progress. Funny how things work out sometimes. As we approached the supposed reboot deadline, our civilization didn't collapse. We didn't descend into complete chaos. Instead, something remarkable happened. We adapted. More than that, we evolved. Maya and her team made breakthrough after breakthrough in understanding the universe's code. No, we couldn't stop the reboot that was hardwired into reality itself, but we could read it, document it, and maybe, just maybe, leave something behind for the next iteration. Think of it like a message in a bottle, Maya explained to the High Council, but the bottle is space-time itself. The various factions in our society gradually found common ground. The rebels and acceptors joined forces, combining spiritual understanding with scientific pursuit. Even the deniers came around, though they insisted on calling our universe's code the language of creation instead of a program. 47 days before the projected reboot, Maya made her final presentation at the Grand Institute. The halls were packed with scientists, religious leaders, and civilians from all 17 systems, watching in person or via hologram. We've encoded our entire civilization's knowledge into the quantum substrate of reality, she announced. Everything we are, everything we've learned, it will survive the reboot. Different format, same data. The next civilization might find it, might even be able to read it, and when they do, they'll know they're not alone, I finished, finally understanding. The crowd erupted in cheers. Not the desperate celebration of before, but something deeper, more meaningful. Here we were, a civilization that had just learned it was part of a vast cosmic experiment, and what did we do? We turned around and started our own experiment, left our own message, added our own variables to the equation. Maya was right all along. The truth didn't destroy us, it transformed us. We stopped being just test subjects and became fellow researchers. Stopped being just data points and became data collectors. You know what's really funny? That 900-year-old paradox that started all this? Turns out it wasn't a flaw in the universe's programming. It was a comment in the code, a signature, a message from one set of researchers to another. And now we've added our own signature to the cosmos. Our own message in the universe's bottle. Not bad for a bunch of simulated beings, right?